Hello and thanks for joining me. Time for some more songs from the saddle, I think, some more philosophical musings about motorcycling. And today I want to make a video about motorcycle helmets. Now, if you didn't see it, I previously made a video looking at whether full face helmets are safer than open face helmets, and I'll leave a link to that at the end of this video. But today I want to ask a very important question, something different, and that question is, should helmets be compulsory or should we have a choice of whether or not to wear them? Now, this is not a question about the effectiveness of helmets. I think that the evidence on that is clear. In the event of an accident, wearing a helmet substantially reduces the risk of severe head injury and death. And I looked at these statistics in my last video on helmets. So that's not what this is about. Rather, this video is asking a question of what I think is greater social and moral importance. And it's about individual freedom of choice. But of course, individual freedom and freedom of choice are issues that are of utmost importance to bikers, because for most riders, motorcycling is an activity with very strong connections to the idea of freedom, and this is something which I have explored in other videos, and again I'll leave a link to those at the end of this video as well. So let's get straight into examining the issues here, and I want to delve into some philosophy because after all these are supposed to be philosophical videos. So the argument I want to look at revolves around the idea of the social contract, which was a concept that was developed by philosophers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke and Thomas Hobbs. Now, you may have heard of Thomas Hobbs' book called The Leviathan. And if you haven't heard of the book, you'll have heard that name, and it comes from the book. And in this book, he explores this idea of a social contract, and he sets out his model of an ideal state. Now, if you have read the book, then you'll probably guess what I'm about to discuss in this video. But anyway, the idea of the social contract is that within an effective society, we must give up some of our individual freedoms in return for protection from the state. So, for example, you give up your freedom to go around killing other people that you dislike in return for protection from other people trying to kill you if they dislike you. So you give up some of your freedoms, your freedoms to act however you wish, in order to gain some other freedoms, in this particular case, protection. So this idea of the social contract sounds perfectly reasonable in theory, but in practice, the question is, at what point should the cutoff come in how far our individual freedoms can be restricted? So, where's the balance there between giving people their freedoms and protecting other people's freedoms? And the reason I'm making this video is I feel that in many areas of society, particularly Western society, and I'm talking about the UK where I live and the USA and other European countries, I think the balance has swung a little bit too far towards taking away some of our freedoms. So I want to delve into the philosophy behind this. So libertarian philosophers such as John Stuart Mill, and I'm going to talk about the work of John Stuart Mill in quite a bit more detail this video, they suggest that the only time when the state has the right to restrict an individual's freedom is when that freedom might impact on others. So if you are going to do something that will have a negative impact, i.e. cause harm to others, then maybe you should be restricted in doing that. But if you want to do things that have no impact on other people, then they are your actions and they are of no concern of the state, and the state should not interfere in your actions. So to understand this concept, maybe help if I give an example. And I think a good example that is in action in many countries, and particularly in the UK where I live, is that smoking is banned in indoor public places. And this is actually a severe restriction on individual freedom. I'm not a smoker, but I felt very strongly that the smokers' freedoms were being restricted when this legislation was brought in. But the argument is that smoking in an enclosed space affects those around you, as they are passively inhaling your smoke. So it's not possible for you to enjoy smoking in an enclosed public space without having an impact on those people around you. Therefore, the argument would go that it is reasonable in this situation to restrict the individual's freedom to smoke, as you can't do this without harming others around you. So this restriction on individuals' freedoms is therefore protecting the rights and the freedom of those around you to live in a smoke-free environment. However, if you smoke in the privacy of your own home, then that's your own affair, because you are not affecting anyone else, except perhaps if you have minors in the house, if you have children in the house, and so, or if you smoke out in public places where the smoke just blows away, then in such cases the state has no right to restrict that activity, because you are having no negative impact on anybody else. So that's one end of the scale, if you like, of the argument. The other end of the scale, then, both morally and politically, is the argument for paternalism. What we know as the nanny state. This is the argument that the state has the right to restrict your activities for your own good. The state is stepping in and stopping you to do things in your own best interest. This is the argument. I'm not putting this argument forward myself. I'm just saying this is the paternalism argument. So again, I'll say what I said at the start of this. The question is therefore one of degree. We've got these different extremes, different points, but where should the cutoff point? Where should the cutoff point come in restricting people's freedoms? Few people, I think, would argue with paternalism when it comes to things like protecting children, but is it appropriate for adults? So let's have a look then specifically at the arguments in relation to motorcycle helmets. Now, it's important to reiterate here that this video is not about whether helmets are effective in reducing deaths or injuries, but rather whether riders should have the right to choose not to wear a helmet, even when they know that this will increase their risk of serious injury or possibly death in the event of an accident. So, why shouldn't someone be free to ride without a helmet if the only person who is put at a higher risk is the rider, that person? If they are not endangering anyone else or removing the freedoms of anyone else, why should they be told that they have to wear a helmet? Well, there are two different arguments that you might hear being put forward for compulsory helmets, and I want to have a look at each one of these in turn because they relate to what I've just been talking about a moment ago. So the first might be called a utilitarian argument, following the utilitarian philosophy of John Stuart Mill. Now, this argument holds that the utility gains, he talked about utility, and it'll become clear what that means in a moment, but the utility gains that we get from helmets are so significant that coercive measures to enforce their use should be used. What that means in plainer English is that if wearing a helmet saves lives, everybody should be made to wear a helmet. Just the fact that wearing a helmet is far more likely to save your life in the event of an accident means that you must be made to wear one. That's the utility argument. And this is very much a paternalistic argument of the so-called nanny state, because the idea here is that the state knows better than you and therefore is protecting you from your own ignorance and stupidity. You know, the argument is if you decide to ride a motorcycle without a helmet, then you're just being stupid and you need to be protected from that stupidity by being made to wear a helmet. So effectively, you are being treated as a child. The state knows better than you, the government knows better than you, and is protecting you from yourself. And the argument is that this is in your own best interest. Now, John Stuart Mill, in his philosophical writing, talked a lot about paternalism, and he distinguished between two different sorts, or you might call them two different levels of paternalism. He firstly identified what is sometimes called strong paternalism, or sometimes called hard paternalism, and that entails constraints being placed upon people who are perfectly rational, or have decision-making capabilities, but they're still made to do something for their own good. So a perfectly rational, sane adult who's perfectly capable of making decisions, but they're still told you must wear a helmet. So that's the hard paternalism. Now, Mill contrasted that with what he called weak or soft paternalism, and that involved limiting the freedom of individuals only when they lacked appropriate decision-making capacity. And what we're talking about there particularly is children. So because we deem children not to have the capacity to make well-informed decisions, then we enforce these things upon them, and so you would make children wear a crash helmet, but not adults, under this weak form of paternalism. So the important thing to gain here from Mill's philosophy here on paternalism is that paternalism requires the individual's own good to be the motivation for restricting their liberty. The state, the government, only has the right to restrict your liberty, your freedoms, if it is in your own good. And it's around this that these degrees or shades of argument lie. So, although Mill made it quite clear that he thought weak paternalism was justified, i.e., for example, protecting children was justified, the argument, or the primary rationale for that was one of impaired capacity to make decisions yourself in your own best interest. So Mill in his writings gave an example of a man trying to cross a bridge that was unsafe, and he was unaware that bridge was unsafe. And Mill argues then that in that case we have the right to stop him from crossing that bridge, even though he wants to cross that bridge, because, to quote Mill, I can't remember Mill's exact words, but it's something along the lines of freedom consists of doing what you want to do, and clearly this man does not want to fall to his death in the river. So we're not taking away his freedom by preventing him from potentially falling to his death in the river. That was Mill's argument. So although Mill supported this idea of weak maternalism, and he thought it was a good thing, he was equally forceful in his arguments against strong paternalism. He felt that if somebody had full individual decision-making capacities, then they should just be given the freedom to pursue what they consider to be their own good in their own way. So if somebody considers that they enjoy riding a motorcycle without a helmet, with the wind in their hair, they should be given the freedom to do that. So based on this formulation from Mill's philosophy, if we have an informed and rational rider who wants to ride a helmet without a motorcycle, then we should permit it. So strong paternalism should not be applied, but weak paternalism is justifiable. So we say, well, an adult can choose to ride without a helmet, but not a child. So you have to be of an age where we feel that you've got, sufficient capacity, 16, 18, 21, whatever the law deems, and then you can make these choices yourself. The second argument that we find for making helmets compulsory revolves around the idea of harm to others. So Mill advocated non-paternalistic intervention should an individual's action threaten the interests of a third party, i.e. other people. So remember what I said earlier about giving up some rights to protect the rights of others. That's what he's talking about here. So according to this harm principle, the only situation in which a power restriction can be restricted over somebody is to prevent harm to others. So the non-paternalistic argument for mandatory helmets is that injuries sustained by riders who ride without helmets results in considerable harm to others, to broader society. There is a cost to the rest of society. If somebody ends up in hospital, they are taking up resources and incurring costs that have to be picked up by other people. Now, some recent figures I saw from the Centre for Disease Control in the USA estimated that helmet laws, i.e. making people wear compulsory helmets, saved over 1 million. Just let this guy go by. Yeah, so these figures estimated that people being made to wear helmets saved over $1 million per fatality, and about $180,000 for each serious injury prevented. Right? So these are the argument is these are costs coming out of the public purse, and therefore there's the justification for making helmets compulsory. And in the UK, this argument is perhaps even stronger, because here healthcare and hospital treatment are free, and they are paid for by wider society through taxes. So the argument here, the moral argument, is that if you end up in hospital because you weren't wearing a helmet, and you require very, very expensive medical treatment, then the rest of society, other people are picking up that cost. Therefore, you are causing harm to those other people. So, those are the main arguments there. Now, in the USA, I believe that only 20 states require riders to wear helmets. And interestingly, helmet laws have actually been repealed in quite a few states in the US. And this is because the US has a much stronger libertarian and anti-paternalistic sentiment than here in the UK. Many of those states do require minors to wear a helmet, but not adults, which I think only serves to highlight this paternalistic nature of the helmet legislation, as I discussed a moment ago. So, those are the basic philosophical and moral arguments underpinning helmet legislation. I hope you found that interesting. What do you think? Do you think wearing a helmet should be a free choice for consenting adults? Please put a comment below, and remember, if you do comment, the arguments I'm looking at in this video are not about safety and the effectiveness of helmets. I discussed that in the earlier video. This is just about individual freedom, i.e. should we have the freedom to not wear a helmet, even if we're putting our life at risk in doing so. I think it's a very interesting point, so I'll be very interested to read your comments below. Thanks very much for following me, if you've followed me so far. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for future ramblings on my Songs from the Saddle channel. Ride safe, see you soon, bye.